With me, roarum ra, well the diddle la, stavy, blah the day do.
Seamus Annis with As I Roved Out. That's a recording done by Alan Lomax back in the 50s. And to find out more about that, I'm talking now to the director of the new film, Lomax in Éirinn. And the film is going to be shown at the Irish Film Festival tomorrow evening in Fort Lauderdale. And on the line with me now, Declan McGrath. And hello, welcome to WLRN, Declan.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for having me.
Now, tell me more about the recording we just heard. That was made by Alan Lomax back in 1951, is it?
That's correct. It's when Alan Lomax arrived in Ireland. It was the first place he landed as part of his mission that he developed in the late 1940s, early 1950s. This kind of really ambitious, grand idea to record and preserve the traditional music of the world. And, you know, it was a ridiculously huge idea. It was never realizable, but he did manage to gather, certainly collect music from every continent. But the first place he stopped, and he actually did the collecting himself, was Ireland. And the first person he met when he got off the boat and landed in Ireland was that guy called Seamus Ennis, who actually was a recognised collector in Ireland, and also a musician. And he went up to Seamus Ennis's house, and they had a few drinks and started chatting about music in Ireland. And Ennis started playing songs, including As I Roved Out and a whole loads of other ones. And kind of Ennis then guided Lomax on a tour around Ireland over the next month, in which Lomax recorded some of the very best traditional music that that the rest of the world hadn't heard. But that's what Alan Lomax was doing by an American coming to Ireland, and some of it had not been recorded even by Ennis or any of the other Irish collectors. And if they had, they were not recorded on as good equipment as Lomax had, because he arrived with a portable magnetic tape device.
It seems like
which is one of the things actually.
Lomax had a vision. I mean, he did this in America before he went to Ireland. In fact, he did that with his father, recording this music. What was he preserving? Because there was a recording industry, right? There were people recording Irish music. What was Alan Lomax recording?
They were recording Irish music, and like in America, America would have had more, records, if you like, of Irish music. But it might have been seen as kind of to say it's twee would be a bit unfair, but certainly it was recorded, and it was the kind of music that might play in music halls or parlor rooms, because they were brought in and the equipment was very, primitive. Even the records were. There was only one track on a record. So the difference with what Lomax did, because what Lomax had done in America in the 1930s when he went into the southern states, was he was field recording. He was recording people in the field, literally in the field, and maybe in cases in America, people that worked in the field. But then when he came to Ireland, he'd be in people's houses or go to the local post office, and people would arrive. So very much he was out and about and collecting the reality of music as it was sung by everyday people. And so the music he recorded was quite different. And some of he recorded styles of music that were about to die out, like a thing called, it's featured in the film, keening, to keen for a kind of wailing sound made by women over dead bodies. It was kind of an old tradition and an old kind of sound that was dying out. Like Alan was the first to record that in Ireland at the very end of its kind of existence as a living tradition. So he was both finding things that had never been recorded before, and also recording maybe what had been collected in Ireland, but at better quality. But more than that, like, his idea wasn't just to record the stuff. He had this idea that he'd put it on an album. Like, LPs had only just been invented. So the records previous to this, maybe you were able to have one track on each side. The LP allowed you, whatever it would be, about like 20 minutes on each side. So he saw an opportunity in that. This is before LPs were common, with lots of like 4 tracks on each side. So he thought, oh, this would be a medium on which you could put several songs, and I could use this new medium of the long playing record and use it to save or to preserve. Each record would preserve selected tracks from one country, and then you could sell that and make that available to people, so people could listen to each other's music. So he wasn't just about recording; he was about distributing and making sure that music was heard. And that's another kind of new thing that he brought to the Irish scene when he arrived in 1951.
Declan McGrath is on the line. His new film is called Lomax in Éirinn. And how did he record? How did you get your interest? When did you find out about Alan Lomax?
I actually found out. I heard on the radio many years ago the recordings that he'd made in the southern states of America. Those kind of early recordings, mostly of actually black prisoners in Mississippi prisoners, in Mississippi prisons, chain gangs, and in kind of plantations that they were working. He recorded their music, and I got into that. I thought that's brilliant. You know, it was kind of the early, like it predated. You can see a direct line going back from that into rock and roll, and indeed there is. Like people, the Stones would have listened to those artists, Led Zeppelin. Like lots of people actually over in England listened to those recordings. So I got interested in that, and then I found out later and was surprised that he had actually recorded in Ireland in the 1950s, and the album that he produced was actually the first long-playing record of Irish traditional music. You know, instead of those other tracks, you know, the 78s that played, you know, a track on each side, and it was Irish traditional music in a way that hadn't been heard. In other words, it was people like Ennis playing the pipes and people singing that kind of keening I was talking about. It was the real thing from real communities. And that album was very important, because you imagine a country like Ireland was doing what it was doing, but this foreigner, this Yank coming over, recording them and then putting it on an album on Columbia Records, you know, the same company that had Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was out in Columbia Records. So for these everyday people who weren't professional musicians to be put on an album with Columbia Records kind of gives them a boost and a self-belief in a traditional art form that really wasn't highly regarded, if you like, by the kind of metropolitan elite at the time. So it gave a boost to the music as well as preserving it.
Do you think because he was American, he had a better appreciation of Irish music?
I wouldn't say he had better, because he was actually a little bit, he didn't know. He had heard a track at home in America, and it had really touched him, and he decided he wanted to go to Ireland and hear more, but he'd only heard one track. So that's why it was important for him to meet Seamus Ennis, the guy we heard at the top of the interview there, because he knew the scene in Ireland. But what Alan didn't know, he made up for in kind of energy and just sheer vision of what he would do, that going for the best, by seeking out the best guide in Ennis, and then going for the best music, and then recording it on the best equipment available and putting it out on this new technology of an LP. And then after that, like Alan actually was based in Europe for about 6 or 7 years after that, and he got a job in the BBC, and he would play that music on the BBC radio. So he was then promoting it to a much bigger audience, and again boosting the kind of the way people viewed themselves and the music as going, okay, somebody from outside thinks this is important, so it must be important. Even though within the culture it would not be seen as something of valuable, it was just seen as something that was, you know, everybody did this, everybody sang these songs and played these instruments. There was nothing, you know, they didn't see anything special in it themselves.
Now, speaking with Declan McGrath, his new movie is called Lomax in Éirinn, when Alan Lomax came and recorded traditional music in Ireland. Did you, do you have actual footage of Alan Lomax in your film?
We do. Unfortunately, not in Ireland. We have all of the very few pictures that were taken of his time in Ireland, but we have other footage of Lomax later talking about it and pictures of him earlier in his life. So, and that was an interesting thing when we were making the film, because obviously what we do have and what is most important are the actual audio recordings that he made, the archive. But we didn't always want to have just archives, so we came up with this idea that to show that we get present day artists to play the music, and there were a lot of interesting things about that. Well, first of all, we had no visual, film of these recordings. But what became very interesting about that is that, in a way, without saying it, we're showing how that his legacy remains, that people are still referring to that album and to the tracks. So you can see people playing in the present day Alan Lomax music. And what you also see in those present day performances is how some people are very loyal and true to, say, a recording that was made in the 50s and the way that song would be sung or that tune would be played in the 1950s. They're very true to the tradition in that way, that they preserve it without changing it. And then you look at other people who see a tradition as something that could be changed slightly. So they'd have taken a recording that Lomax made in the 1950s of an Irish traditional singer or musician, and they have given it a spin for the 21st century and made it slightly different. And it's interesting to see that in the course of the film, that now that kind of the traditional player can go one of those two routes, and they're equally valid in my opinion.
I get the feeling,
one being very, very loyal, and one kind of changing and adapting.
I get the
making
feeling
it relevant to.
Well, I get the feeling that Alan Lomax, the reason why he was recording these songs is because he liked the tradition. He wanted to preserve that tradition. So I don't know if he would be so up on the way it's changing.
That's interesting, because obviously, and one of the reasons he felt that he would want, he had this big idea, everybody hearing each other's music, and also the technology, as I said, he's seen opportunities in the invention of magnetic tape and the invention of the LP. But he was also worried that, like, if you go back to the late 40s and 1950s, I suppose that's the beginning, post-war America. He lived in New York, like real modernization and consumerism was beginning to start, and he could see that some of these old traditions were in danger of really being suffocated, if you like, by this new mass media, by this new modernity, of travel and mass media and record companies plugging things in the radio. So you're right, his big motivation was to save and preserve. But the interesting thing is, during his life, he began to see it was more complicated than that, because you can't just preserve a tradition and freeze it. And it doesn't actually work that way. And one of his realizations about that came in Ireland, and again, it's in the film. He arrived in a house in Ireland on the west coast in Connemara, and he heard a woman play a tune on a fiddle, and he realized that he knew that tune by a different name. He played it back to her, and he knew it as a tune that he had collected in the Appalachian Mountains. And he realized that tune had come from, as tunes often did, with immigrants maybe coming over from Ireland, and had gone into another environment, had been kept and preserved as part of a past, but also changed by coming into contact with a new culture. So you could kind of see how everything is kind of interconnected, and things do automatically change. And he was later then, after Ireland, when he was in England in the late 50s, and he's working in the radio station, and he heard what basically was skiffle music, these guys playing like kind of guitars and playing these bands. But people like the early Beatles, actually, the early Rolling Stones, David Bowie had a skiffle band, Van Morrison, all of these people kind of started out in skiffle. But they were listening, they were being inspired by people like Leadbelly, people like Woody Guthrie, that Lomax had recorded. So we could see how, the music is just it's like a big flowing stream. And then what happened to that skiffle music, that kind of developed into all of those names I've mentioned, took the kind of skiffly music, electrified it, changed the beat a bit, and then you're into what we call rock and roll. And Lomax, you're quite right. Lomax's reputation is he just wants to save, and did get quite annoyed if people were changing things or bringing in electric guitars. Famously, complaining about Bob Dylan playing an electric guitar in Newport in 1965, the Newport Folk Festival. But on the other hand, he fully recognised that how music grew and developed. And I think what he really, his kind of real touchstone was authenticity. You know, so you find him praising things like kind of more rock and roll and electric stuff that comes out of an older tradition if he feels it's authentic. But of course, you know, what you think is authentic is fairly subjective. You know, and you might argue about that. But and it's interesting that, yeah, because you know that debate between what is tradition. Do you have to be loyal to something as it was in the past and be forever and ever, or if you change it and adapt it, is it still part of the tradition? Like that's a debate. Mm-hmm. And there's a tension within that debate. But yeah, and we kind of try to suggest that in the film because it's interesting, and we don't want to portray something because it isn't like that. The modern day artists show how that music is being played, and it is a living thing. Whether it's a living thing that is completely loyal to how it was in the past, or a living thing that takes that model of the past and slightly adapts it by being as true as possible, that the musician still feels it's part of a continuing tradition.
Speaking with the
Anyway, I mean, hopefully that's in the film, and it's great, you know.
I'm speaking with Declan McGrath. His new film is called Lomax in Éirinn. Éirinn is spelled Eiriinn. Is that a place in Ireland?
No, that is the Irish word for Ireland.
I see. Okay. Well, the film Lomax in Éirinn is free and open to the public, and it's part of the Irish Film Festival. And the film is taking place Monday evening, 7 p.m. on the 4th floor at the Alvin Shulman Library on the campus of Nova Southeastern University. I'm going to play another song by one of those contemporary bands you're talking about. In fact, doesn't Paul narrate the movie for you?
That's right. Paul Brennan from Clonard narrates the movie, and he has a real link to the story. Like, effectively, Clonard grew up in the 70s and became famous in a really remote place in the northwest of Ireland. And they, as teenagers, they went around a bit like Lomax and collected the old songs, including the one I think you're about to hear, Boohullo and Éirinn, like old songs that were sung, and tried to keep them alive. This is in the 70s. And one of the people they collected from next door, in fact, their next door neighbour, was a woman called Kitty Gallagher, who Lomax recorded from and collected the songs. So they have that link. And one of the songs that they collected from Kitty O'Gallagher, the words had been written by Paul Brennan's, who's one of all Clonard, Enya, Paul, all of them, all the same family, by their grandfather. So that record, the Irish record, you know, has a track written by the grandfather of Clonard. So for Paul, it was quite an important story, both in another collector who collected music like they did, and in the fact that it was actually a family link.
That's fascinating. Well, let's listen to that song, and congratulations on your new movie, Lomax and Éirinn, playing...
Thank you. Thanks very much.
...tomorrow evening, and Declan McGrath, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's very good of you. Thank you now.
Slum